Have you ever found a key in your house, one you've never used? One that makes your chest tighten just thinking about turning it, that makes your eyes well up before you even know why? Picture this, an old dresser drawer in your grandma's room, a small brass ring with a few worn keys, house key, garage key, and then the ones no one can explain. A tiny, delicate one, like it once locked a diary full of secrets never told. A rusty one, hiding something buried for decades. In the spring of 1989, when she passed, her daughter picked them up, hands shaking. Her granddaughter asked, "What do they open?" And silence, just tears. Because some keys don't open doors, they open hearts. Locked rooms inside a woman who raised a family, labeled every jar, folded every sheet perfectly, but kept her own pain hidden, the unspoken losses, the dreams she never chased, the regrets she carried alone. Now the real question hits you. What if there's a key like that in your home? One that's been waiting, one that, if turned, could flood everything with memories you never asked about. Today, we're turning those keys. We're opening what was never meant to be seen. Because some stories don't die with the person. They just wait for the right hand to set them free.
The keys were ordinary, a small brass ring holding maybe 6 or 7 of them, each worn smooth at the edges from years in handling. They sat in a wooden bowl on her dresser for as long as anyone could remember, next to a small mirror and a bottle of hand cream that was never quite empty. Soft pause. When she passed in the spring of 1989, her daughter found them while sorting through the bedroom. House key, back door, garage, beat. The others were harder to place, slower. One looked like it might fit a filing cabinet. Pause. Another was small, delicate, the kind that opens a diary or a jewelry box no one had ever seen. Her granddaughter asked, "What are they for?" Beat. The daughter paused, turning the ring slowly in her palm. Silence. She did not know. Quiet. For a woman who kept everything in order, who labeled her canning jars, folded her linens with hospital corners, measured rhythm. This small mystery felt strange. Pause. But then again, there had always been rooms in her mother that stayed locked. Soft. Not out of cruelty. Beat. Just privacy. Pause. The kind of privacy women of that generation learned to keep, because there was nowhere else to put certain thoughts. Deep pause. The keys went into a drawer. Finality. But the question lingered. Silence. What do you do with the small pieces of a life that no one thought to ask about? Long, reflective pause. She was 17 when she first imagined leaving. Not running away, nothing so dramatic. Just imagined what it might feel like to keep going. To board a bus heading toward a college town she had only read about. To sit in a lecture hall with a notebook open. To become the kind of person who knew things, not because she had to manage a household, but because learning itself was the point. Her teachers had told her she was bright. She read quickly, remembered everything, asked questions that made the classroom go quiet. That particular kind of quiet that means someone has touched something real. There was a small scholarship available, enough to cover part of the tuition at the state university 2 hours north. Her father worked in a machine shop. Her mother took in sewing. It would be tight, but possible. She filled out the application in careful handwriting. She remembered the weight of the envelope in her hand. As she walked to the mailbox at the end of the street, the metallic clang of the door closing, the strange, brief feeling of having done something just for herself. 3 weeks later, she met him at a church social.
He was older, already working, steady in a way her father approved of. He had a car, polite manners, a future that looked certain. When he asked her to dinner, she said yes, soft, because it seemed like the thing a normal girl would do. And she was a normal girl, wasn't she? The kind who wanted what other girls wanted. The acceptance letter came in April. She read it alone, in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed. Then she folded it neatly, placed it in the bottom drawer of her dresser, beneath her winter sweaters. They were married in August of 1965, 3 months after her 18th birthday. The wedding was small, held in the same church where they had met. She wore a dress her mother had altered from a cousin's wedding 2 years prior. It fit well enough. In the photographs, she is smiling, but there is something careful in her posture, a kind of stillness that might be mistaken for contentment. He was not unkind, that should be said clearly. He worked long hours at the plant, brought home his paycheck, did not drink heavily or raise his voice. He expected dinner at 6 and a clean house, and did not think to ask what she did with her days because he assumed he already knew. This was not unusual. Most men assumed the same about their wives. She learned to keep house the way her mother had taught her. There was a rhythm to it that could be soothing if you let it. Laundry on Monday, ironing on Tuesday, marketing on Wednesday. The house they rented was small, just 4 rooms, but she kept it beautifully. Neighbors commented on her flower boxes, the way her curtains always looked crisp. What they did not see was the small library she began to build on a shelf in the hallway. Books from the thrift store, 10 or 15 cents each, history, philosophy, a few novels that had won awards she read about in the newspaper. She read in the afternoons, in the hour between finishing the dishes and starting dinner. Sometimes she took notes in the margins, small pencil marks that no one else would ever see. When she became pregnant in the spring of 1966, she put the books away for a while. There would be less time now. She understood that. She had always understood that. The baby came in January, a daughter. She was healthy and loud and needed everything, the way babies do. There is a particular tiredness that comes with new motherhood, the kind that lives in your bones and makes time feel strange. Days blurred together. Weeks passed in a rhythm of feeding and changing and soothing and sleeping, in brief, fractured intervals that never quite felt like rest. She loved her daughter, that was never in question. But love does not always fill every space inside a person. There were moments, usually late at night, when the house was finally quiet, when she would stand at the kitchen window and feel the weight of all the things she was not doing, not learning, not becoming. Her husband's sister had gone to secretarial school. Another woman from church had taken a job at the library, part-time, just sorting books and checking cards, but still, it was something. When she mentioned it once, carefully, her husband looked confused. What would she need a job for? He provided well enough, and who would watch the baby? She did not bring it up again. Instead, she began to collect small things, a course catalog from the community college that someone had left at the grocery store, a newspaper clipping about a woman who had published a book of poetry at age 43, a list she made one afternoon of subjects she wished she knew more about: European history, economics, biology, art. She kept these papers in an old cigar box in the linen closet behind the extra towels where no one would think to look. The box became a kind of companion, evidence that the thoughts in her head were real. Her second child was born in 1969, a son this time. The house felt smaller with each passing day, the walls seeming to close in with the weight of responsibility and routine. The days felt longer, stretching into endless cycles of feeding, changing, soothing, cleaning.
But she had learned by then, through trial and necessity, how to carve out minutes for herself, small pockets of time that belonged to her alone. While the children napped, she would sit at the kitchen table with a book from the library, reading quickly, hungrily, her attention always half turned toward the hallway in case one of them woke. She read everything she could get her hands on: history, literature, science, philosophy. The books became windows to worlds she could not physically enter, conversations with minds she would never meet in person. She discovered, almost by accident, that the local community college offered correspondence courses. You could complete lessons at home, mail them in, receive them back with corrections and grades. It was designed for working adults, for people who could not attend regular classes due to jobs or family obligations or geography. The advertisement had been tucked in the back of the newspaper, easy to miss, but she had seen it, and once seen, could not unsee it. She thought about it for 3 months before she finally wrote away for information. The decision felt enormous, almost transgressive. What right did she have to spend money on herself? What would her husband say? What would the neighbors think? But the wanting was stronger than the fear, at least in that moment. The packet arrived in a plain envelope, unremarkable from the outside. She opened it carefully, read every page twice, then a third time. Course descriptions, enrollment forms, fee schedules. The cost was manageable if she was careful with the grocery money, if she bought the store brand instead of name brand, if she skipped the small luxuries she sometimes allowed herself: a magazine, a new lipstick, a nicer cut of meat. She enrolled in a single course, Introduction to American History. It felt safe, neutral, the kind of subject no one could object to. The books came in the mail 2 weeks later, heavy and official. She kept them on the shelf with her other books, and no one noticed because no one was looking. Her husband saw her read all the time anyway. These were just more books. She worked on the assignments at night after everyone had gone to bed, writing her essays by hand at the kitchen table under the small lamp that hung above the sink. The house was finally quiet then, peaceful in a way it never was during daylight hours. She wrote carefully, thinking through each sentence, each argument. It had been years since anyone had asked her to think critically, to form and defend a position. When the first graded assignment came back, folded in a manila envelope, her hands shook as she opened it. She had earned a B+. The instructor had written a note in red ink at the top: thoughtful analysis, well done. 3 words. She read those 3 words over and over, feeling something unlock inside her chest. Someone had read her thoughts and found them valuable. Someone had acknowledged that her mind still worked, still mattered. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in the cigar box with the other hidden things: the acceptance letter from 1965, the lists of dreams deferred, the evidence of an interior life that continued to exist despite everything. The box was her secret archive, proof that she was more than what the world saw when it looked at her. The years moved the way years do, slowly in the daily moments, quickly when looked back upon. Her children grew. Her daughter learned to read, then to question everything. Her son learned to walk, then to run, then to climb trees in the backyard with fearless abandon. Her husband stayed the same, reliable and present, but somehow distant, living his own parallel life that occasionally intersected with hers. The house remained small but orderly, a reflection of her constant effort to maintain control over at least this one aspect of her existence. She completed 5 correspondence courses over the span of 4 years, one at a time, always in secret: history, literature, basic mathematics, introductory psychology, and finally a course in composition. Each one fed something inside her that had been starving. She had no plan for what to do with this education. There was no degree waiting at the end, no career she could point to as justification for the time and money spent. But the learning itself had become necessary, like breathing. It was the thing that kept her from disappearing entirely into the role of wife and mother. She began to notice, with increasing clarity, the cost of her silence. Not in dramatic ways, there were no explosive arguments or moments of crisis, just small moments that accumulated over time, building into a weight she carried constantly. At dinner parties, when the men gathered in the living room to talk about politics and the stock market and the state of the world, and the women gathered in the kitchen to talk about recipes and children and the latest episodes of their favorite television shows, she would feel a familiar tightness in her chest. She knew things. She had read about the Vietnam War, about the Civil Rights Movement, about economic theory and political philosophy. She had opinions that were informed and carefully considered, built on actual knowledge rather than received wisdom. But the few times she had ventured to share them, speaking up in mixed company, the room had gone briefly awkward. Someone would smile too brightly and change the subject with a kindness that felt worse than outright dismissal. Her husband would give her a look she had learned to interpret, not now, not here. She learned to stay quiet, to nod along, to save her thoughts for the journal she had started keeping, or for the rare conversations with the librarian, who seemed to understand that a woman could care about both her children and the state of the world. Her daughter, now 10, was bright and curious. She asked questions constantly, her mind always working. Why is the sky blue? What makes a plant grow? Where do words come from? How do airplanes stay up? Why do people speak different languages? Her mother answered as best she could, sometimes consulting the encyclopedias she had bought used from a neighbor. She wanted her daughter to stay curious, to believe that her questions mattered, that her mind was valuable. One afternoon, while they were folding laundry together, her daughter asked what she had wanted to be when she grew up. The question landed strangely, unexpectedly. She stood there, a towel in her hands, and found she did not have a simple answer ready. A teacher, maybe? Or a researcher? Someone who worked with books and ideas? Someone whose mind was considered useful, whose intelligence was an asset rather than something to be hidden. She told her daughter she had always wanted to be a mother. It was not entirely a lie. She did love her children, did find meaning in raising them, but it was not entirely the truth either. The truth was that she had wanted many things and had been allowed to have only some of them. In 1974, her husband's company downsized. He kept his job, but there were no raises that year, and the mood in the house grew tighter, more anxious. Money had always been managed carefully, but now it had to be counted down to the penny. Every purchase was weighed and justified. Luxuries disappeared entirely from the budget. She stopped the correspondence courses. There was no question, no discussion needed. The family came first. It always had. That was simply the order of things, the unspoken rule by which she had structured her entire adult life. But stopping felt like a small death, a door closing on something essential. She had been working on a literature course, reading Steinbeck and Hemingway and Faulkner, writing essays about narrative structure and character development and the use of symbolism. She had been good at it, better than good. The instructor had suggested, in a note on her last assignment, that she consider enrolling in a full program, that she clearly had a talent for literary analysis. Of course, she could not. The suggestion was impossible, impractical, laughable even. But the suggestion itself had meant something. Someone had seen potential in her work, had imagined a future for her that extended beyond the kitchen and the laundry room. She watched other women begin to change around her. A neighbor went back to school, her children now old enough to be left alone for a few hours. Another friend got a job as a bank teller, proud of her weekly paycheck, her contribution to the household. The world was shifting in small, uneven ways. Women's liberation was in the news, though she was never quite sure what it meant for someone like her, someone who had already made her choices and could not unmake them. But for her, the walls stayed the same. The routine continued unchanged. Wake early, make breakfast, clean the kitchen, do the laundry, prepare lunch, run errands, start dinner, clean again, help with homework, put the children to bed, clean once more, fall into bed exhausted. Repeat, repeat, repeat. She began to understand, with a clarity that was almost painful, that some opportunities do not come back around, that there are windows in a life, and when they close, they stay closed. The time for college had passed. The time for a career had passed. She was 31 years old, still young by most measures, still healthy and capable, but she felt the particular weight of time that comes when you realize you are living someone else's version of your life, following a script you did not write and would not have chosen. She did not grow bitter exactly. Bitterness requires a kind of outward anger, an accusatory stance toward the world, and she had learned long ago to keep anger internal, to let it dissolve slowly into something quieter and more manageable. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance. She was not sure there was a meaningful difference between the two.
Her children grew into teenagers, each following their own trajectory. Her daughter was sharp and restless, already talking about college, about leaving, about becoming someone. She spent hours in her room reading, studying, planning her escape from the small town that felt increasingly suffocating. Her mother helped her with applications, proofread her essays, encouraged her in ways both generous and painful. She wanted her daughter to go, needed her to go, even as it meant watching someone else live the life she had once imagined for herself, even as it meant confronting daily the path not taken. Her son was quieter, more content with the familiar. He would probably stay local, work with his hands like his father. There was nothing wrong with that. It was honest work, steady work, the kind of work that built communities and kept families fed. But she hoped he would not marry too young, hoped he would give himself time to know who he was before binding himself to someone else's expectations and needs. She hoped he would not make the mistakes she had made, though she could never quite articulate what those mistakes had been. After all, how could she regret decisions that had given her the children she loved? She had started keeping a journal a few years earlier. Nothing elaborate, just a small notebook with a plain cover that she kept hidden in her nightstand. She did not write about her day or her family. That felt too dangerous, too revealing. Instead, she wrote about ideas, questions she still had about the world, books she wished she could read, observations about politics and society and human nature. She wrote the thoughts she could not speak aloud, the opinions she had learned to keep to herself. The journal joined the other papers in the cigar box, which had been replaced by a larger box as her collection grew. The box had become heavier over the years, literally and metaphorically. It was proof that her interior life existed, even if no one else saw it. It was evidence that she was still thinking, still growing, still becoming someone, even if that someone remained invisible to everyone around her. One evening, her husband found her reading at the kitchen table. It was late, past midnight, and she had not heard him come downstairs. He asked if something was wrong, concern evident in his voice. She said no, she just could not sleep. It happened sometimes, especially as she got older. He looked at the book in her hands, a thick volume on European history she had checked out from the library, and something passed across his face. Not anger, not exactly, more like confusion, or perhaps a flicker of recognition that his wife was in some fundamental way unknown to him. After all these years, he still did not quite know what to make of her, this woman who read thick books at midnight, who seemed content, but sometimes got a faraway look in her eyes that suggested she was thinking about something he could not access. She smiled and closed the book, came to bed a few minutes later. They did not talk about it. They never talked about it. Their marriage was built on a foundation of things left unsaid. Her daughter left for college in the fall of 1978, heading to a state university 3 hours away. The house felt enormous and unbearably quiet in her absence. She found herself standing in her daughter's empty room, touching the books left behind, the posters still tacked to the walls, the desk where she had studied for so many hours. She felt proud and gutted in equal measure, proud that her daughter was getting the opportunity she herself had been denied, gutted by the loss, by the reminder of what might have been. That winter, she took a part-time job at the local library. Her husband did not object. The children were grown, or nearly so. Her son was a senior in high school, independent and capable. The money would help, certainly, but more than that, she needed something of her own, something outside the house and the endless domestic routine. She worked the front desk 3 afternoons a week, checking books in and out, helping patrons find what they were looking for, recommending titles based on people's interests. It was not much. The pay was modest, the work simple, but it was hers. For those 12 hours a week, she had an identity beyond wife and mother. She was the librarian, the person who knew about books, whose opinions were sought and valued. She began to talk with the head librarian, an older woman named Margaret, who had worked there for 20 years. They discovered they had read many of the same books, had similar taste and interests. They talked during quiet moments, their conversations ranging across topics the way good conversations do when both parties feel safe and understood. Literature, history, politics, philosophy, all the subjects she never got to discuss at home. It was the first time in years she had been able to speak freely about ideas, without watching her words, without gauging reactions, without worrying that she was being too much, or wanting too much, or thinking too much. Margaret treated her as an intellectual equal, and that simple act of recognition felt revolutionary. One day, Margaret mentioned casually that she had gone back to school in her 40s, finished a degree in library science. It took her 6 years, attending classes 1 or 2 at a time while working full-time. Her children had been grown by then, out of the house. She had saved for years to afford it, but she had done it, and it had changed everything for her. Not just her career, but her sense of herself, her understanding of what was possible. She thought about that conversation for weeks, turning it over in her mind like a stone. She was 43 years old now. Her son would graduate high school in a year. After that, the house would be truly empty. There would be time then, theoretically. Money would still be tight, but maybe manageable if she kept working, if she saved carefully. But she also knew that hoping could be its own kind of cruelty. Better, perhaps, to accept what was, to find contentment in small things, the library job, her books, the garden she tended in the backyard, the occasional lunch with Margaret where they discussed what they were reading. These were not small things, really. They were enough. They had to be enough. She bought a small filing cabinet at a yard sale one Saturday morning, a sturdy metal one with 2 drawers and a lock. She brought it home and placed it in the corner of the bedroom, telling her husband it was for household papers, bills, warranties, important documents. He nodded, uninterested, and went back to his newspaper. She transferred all the papers from the cigar box into the cabinet, organizing them carefully in folders. Correspondence course certificates, essays with their grades and comments, the acceptance letter from 1965 that she had never thrown away, still crisp despite the years, the journal, now several notebooks full, the lists she had made as a young woman, dreams catalogued and deferred. She locked the cabinet and put the key on her key ring, just another key among several. No one asked what it was for. No one was curious enough to ask. She lived another decade, watching the world change in ways both large and small. Her children built their own lives, made their own choices. Her daughter became a teacher, married someone kind and supportive, had 2 children of her own. She seemed happy, fulfilled, living the life of professional accomplishment and personal satisfaction that had been foreclosed to her mother's generation. Her son took a job with the Postal Service, steady and reliable, eventually buying a small house 2 towns over. Her husband retired, and they settled into a quieter rhythm, the 2 of them alone together after all those years. They were companionable enough, comfortable in their routines. They watched television together in the evenings, tended the garden, visited their children and grandchildren. It was a peaceful life, maybe even a good life by most measures. She never went back to school. The window had closed, and she had made her peace with that. The wanting had faded, or perhaps just transformed into something else, a wistful what-if that she carried but no longer struggled against.
But she kept reading, kept learning on her own terms, kept the filing cabinet locked, its contents a private archive of the intellectual life she had lived in the margins of domesticity. When she died, relatively suddenly, of a stroke at 62, her daughter came to help sort through the house. It was overwhelming, deciding what to keep and what to discard, what had value and what was simply the accumulated debris of a long life. She found the filing cabinet while going through her parents' bedroom, noticed the lock, searched until she found the key on her mother's keyring. She opened it not knowing what to expect. Household papers, maybe tax records or old insurance policies. Instead, she sat down on the floor of her mother's bedroom and read through papers that revealed a completely different person from the one she thought she knew. The courses completed in secret while she was a child, the essays marked with careful grades and encouraging comments, the journal entries that revealed a woman who had been working, questioning, reaching all those years, a mind that had never stopped growing, even when growth seemed impossible. She wept, not from simple sadness, though there was sadness. She wept from recognition, from the sudden understanding that her mother had lived a second life entirely inside her own head, that she had carried dreams she could not speak aloud, that she had been so much more than anyone had asked her to be or acknowledged her for being. All those years of quiet competence, of selfless service, had concealed this other self, this thinking, yearning, intellectually ambitious woman who had never quite disappeared despite everything. The keys were ordinary, small, brass, unremarkable, but they opened something that mattered, a record of interior existence, proof that a woman could be unseen and still be whole. That ambition denied does not disappear, it simply changes shape, becomes quieter, learns to survive in smaller spaces. That a mind can remain active and hungry even when the world offers it no place to feast. Her granddaughter, 17 now and preparing for college herself, noticed her mother crying and asked what was wrong, what was in all those papers. Her mother hesitated, then handed her the journal, the oldest one, with entries dating back to the early 1970s. She told her to read it, to understand that the women who came before her had wanted things too, had been intelligent and capable and hungry for more, that the opportunities she now took for granted, college, career, choice, had been built, in part, on the silent endurance of women like her grandmother who had wanted the same things, but lived in a different time. The granddaughter read late into the night, curled up in her grandmother's empty bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of a hidden life. When she finished, she placed the journal carefully back in the filing cabinet, locked it, put the key in her pocket, a talisman, a reminder, a responsibility. Some inheritances are not spoken or formally bequeathed. They are discovered, recognized, carried forward by those who understand their value. The keys themselves were ordinary, mass-produced, identical to thousands of others, but what they protected was not. A woman's determination to remain intellectually alive, to keep learning and growing, even when no one was watching, even when there was no reward or recognition, even when the world insisted she should be satisfied with less.